Hey, all, Sean Maloney, Digital Business Masters. Another overview call. Every Monday, we do these strategy calls just to show people where we're at with the big picture. Huge amount to talk about this week because we had the Bitcoin conference over in Las Vegas for 3 days last week. Huge amounts of information coming through there. And obviously, we've got Prague coming up towards the middle of June. So the big picture is coming together nicely. And then the second part of this call, you'll see the link below. You need to be a systems and above income subscriber in order to access the second part of this particular session today, where we're going to talk about how we have, for a while now, well over 5 years, leveraged our assets, collateralized our assets to create ongoing access to liquidity. And then we allocate that liquidity into cash flows. Okay. So I'll show you how we do that, because we're now finally getting to the point whereby we can see reliable inclines in Bitcoin price because of the likes of BlackRock and other institutions. They're not going to allow the thing to move around as much as we've seen in prior years. So we can leverage that and work with that. That's the whole idea of looking at the big picture. And it's a privilege now we've got for the first time, mid-2025, ever. Because back 10 years ago, to 15, 14, whatever it was years ago, when Bitcoin first came to our attention, that wasn't possible. It was way, way, way too volatile. Now it's not. All right. So let's have a look at how that works. Well, let's first of all show you why we do what we do, where the big picture fits in to give us the confidence about what I've just said, and then how we take that confidence to do things practically to run our businesses. Remember, you're running a business here. You're not just speculating and hoping for the best. We're not here to give any financial advice at DBM. That's not what we're about. What you do as a grown adult is your business. We can provide you with education, support, skills, mindset, and we can also guide you towards various ways that you leverage digital assets, but we can't do it for you. All right. So we're not here to give you any advice, but we'll always suggest that you always seek financial education. Why? Well, in case you've been under a rock, then you may have noticed all the decades that you've been working away. You know, it's not a coincidence that the average age of the community at DBM is well over 50. People have been working through decade after decade after decade and scratching their heads thinking, why have I still not got more money than month? Why have I consistently, even now at this age, got more month than money? Well, that's maybe because you've been leaning on your abilities to earn, which is predominantly done in fiat currency, and then taking those earnings to buy liabilities straight away and continue to buy liabilities. No, what you need to be doing is taking the same energy and the skill and effort that you put into life, we all have to make a living, and then convert that into cash flow. And it's the cash flows that fund your liabilities. And that is a mindset and a skill, which is a big part of what we do in the academy with the coaches. Okay. So think very carefully. How do we do that? Well, we do it in many different ways, because you need to do it in many different ways. Today, in the second part of this call, we'll be focused on the Bitcoin equity aspect. What does it take for us to create year-over-year abilities for us to live our lives purely from Bitcoin? What does that look like in real numbers? So we've done that forever. That's a balance sheet, yeah? But you're not going to be able to necessarily consistently just live off collateral. You have to also attach to your balance sheet a profit and loss account. And that is served by finding yield. So we do that through USDT, USDC smart contracts. Yeah. And we tap into various liquidity provisions. And those liquidity provisions provide us a yield. Now, is that easy? No. Is it still relatively new as a technology? Absolutely. Is it crystallizing and becoming easier and more legitimate? Yes. Do we need to carry on organizing ourselves to stay ahead of what we've done over the past 4, 5, 6 years? Absolutely. Do most people do that? No. They moan and groan and blame and kick out, right? If you're going to get involved, you need to understand what you're doing, understand the timings, and when you are involved, you've got to finish the job. It's exactly the same with the altcoin industry. The difference with the altcoin industry is you've got equity and yield by definition. And it's much more dynamic than even Bitcoin, but therefore much more risky. But higher yields, higher equity is bound to come with risk. You've got to calculate that and consider that in your business model. That's where the mindset and the skills come in. So get the mindset and the skills organized, then go into the systems that are represented here, and then you'll be managing income rather than chasing income. Okay? Now, to support that whole structure, and there's much more to it than that, we've created an ecosystem of subscriptions that allow people to go through the process of mindset to wealth. Do the majority of people be successful in this? No. Why? Well, because they find out at some point that it's too difficult or it's not working, and they sort of get lost somewhere between skills and systems. Or they'll throw themselves, they'll try and buy success, they'll throw things straight at income, okay, in terms of the spectrum. And then when something goes slightly wrong, they draw the horns in because they haven't got the mindset and the skills to manage what it takes to finish what they started. So what we tend to find is there's a spectrum of people, which is normal. That's what society is made up of. But your best thing to do is start with your skills and move up steadily through the process. And don't move up until you've sorted out what you need to do in mindset and skills. Work with a few systems to get yourself rolling. Predominantly Bitcoin would be the best place to start, just dollar cost average Bitcoin. And then learn what we're going to talk about shortly, which is how to leverage that for longer term growth equity that you can deploy with the right mindset into things that are proving themselves all the time in USDT, smart contracts, or altcoin liquidity pools. Right? And as more time goes by, the more proof and more evidence and more confidence gets built in what we're moving with. Right? So as ever, early adopters will plow the course, the pioneers, but as time passes, it gets easier and easier and easier for people. And all we do is blueprint that. That's all DBM does. It just blueprints that process, that's all. Okay? So we're here to support everybody who wishes to be supported. Now, where does our confidence come from with regards to where we are in 2025? Well, it comes from a long history, well over a decade now, where we've been working in this industry, trying to figure out where digital assets have a place alongside fiat. Yeah. And it's not been easy. It's not been easy, as you can see from this chart. Yeah. If you're lucky enough to get back involved far back as 2012, 2014, and you've been skilled enough and resilient enough to hold, then today you're made. Not very many people have that ability. If you got involved a bit further down the track towards the end of the 2010s, then obviously you got a lot of sideways, quite boring for many, many years. And then we saw these big spikes during COVID. Yeah. That's when we recognized that we needed to set up an academy. We've been around 5 years now, which is a lifetime in this industry. A lot of people come and go, but to be around for 5 years is kudos to the DBM coaches. And then another winter. Yeah. And then boom, all of a sudden you cross this yellow line here, this Rubicon, which represents where we've just come from now for the past year or so. And it's been manifest massively since November the 5th, when the US government had a huge policy shift in terms of their beliefs, understanding, and guidance when it comes to crypto assets. And then here we are, summer of 2025, new all-time highs just last week during one of the biggest Bitcoin conferences there's ever been. And we're poised now to take all these tailwinds and use them as individuals to be able to create a much more consistent line with regards to how we take assets that we've been building up all these years or prepare for capital flows that we've built up all these years. For many of us, it's both. And we then get ready for what we're going to do next, which is why you'll hear us talk a lot in DBM about security, organizing your wallets, cash flow forecasting, figuring out what you're going to do next, which is what we'll talk about in the second part of this call today. Because all that excitement of, well, show me the money, you know, Bitcoin all-time highs, creating 6% yields, organizing project management so that you're ready when things move into the next gear. All that's easy to say and do, but it's a fool's errand to just wait for that to be in your line of sight, but not know what to do. So this goes back to mindset and skill again. Whereas even in these doldrum times, you can see how many we've been through over the years. We're preparing for for the next phase, the next phase, the next phase, because we understand how to run businesses. So we're very much now at the point where we've got big institution, big government behind us, which has given us the confidence to be able to get ready, which is why we're doing these calls every single week to help and encourage people to finish what they start. Okay? But it's all very good having all that information about probabilities, but where do those probabilities come from? Well, it comes from deep analysis of what's going on, and you're not going to pick this up in mainstream media. Mainstream media don't understand this. Normal companies at the moment don't understand this. Many do, but most don't. And governments in certain parts of the world, most parts of the world, definitely still don't understand this, especially if you're based in Europe. So what do? Well, we have to go behind the scenes. We have to find direction. That's the whole reason. A decade ago, this wouldn't have been possible because you didn't have the outlets we have today. And if you did, they were just starting out. But now we've got a whole ream of media channels that we can go to. Brings with it its own perils. But if you know what you're doing and you're connected to the right people, you can find this information. And all we do at DBM every Monday is disseminate that in a way that is bringing all the major headlines. So this week, there's 2 pages of this because we had such a lot of information last week. And it's giving us now the ability to put even more focus on what I'll talk about at the second part of this call today. All right. But the top lines haven't changed. The macro guidance isn't changing and won't change. And we're going to find out more today at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, New York time, from Jerome Powell himself. He's only got 2 choices. The information is telling us, as you can see on the chart, that he's already maneuvered into printing mode. We know what M2 means, and we can see when we track it with a 12-week offset, invariably Bitcoin follows it precisely. Even this weekend, it followed it with a slight trough, and now it's bouncing back up again. It's very, very interesting watching M2. Yeah. Also closed the largest monthly Bitcoin high ever seen just this last weekend. Now that's happening because Jerome Powell et al. Are doing what they need to do, which is to keep printing currency. What is the next piece in their armory? Well, it's to cut interest rates. And they're way behind. The chances of the central bank in the UK and the ECB cutting rates again this month are relatively high. The US has not cut rates yet. As soon as they do, then the probabilities of us enjoying another Bitcoin run are very, very high for all the reasons we've spoken about every single week for the past year. Okay. So the whole idea is to be ready. And then you've got indicators like the golden cross has come back in again. That's going to push Bitcoin on top of what we've just said about what's going on with macroeconomics. All right. So they're the big headlines, the one we're always watching every week to give us the confidence. If you've been listening to what we've said for years, just own one Bitcoin, just dollar cost average, then you're on the front foot. If you sat listening to this, not started yet, or you've not had the discipline to keep that going, then a lot of this might feel a little bit, well, I've not got a position yet. Well, start. It's not a difficult thing. It's a case of discipline and pushing yourself to where you need to be to get in position with your Bitcoin balance sheet. So they're top level headlines on macro. In terms of the more secondary layer, you've got multiple companies. Blockchain Group, which is the equivalent of Strategy in Europe, just raised last week just over $63 million to acquire Bitcoin. Okay, so that's a sign. There's more signs you'll see in the political section about what's going on in Europe, which is great to see. The SEC met with the NASDAQ last week to discuss tokenizing securities. I mean, who'd have thought we'd be saying that? Thankfully, now the SEC have people in that 3-letter institution that understand not just digital assets, but the need for tokenization, the need for fixed supply, the ability, the speed with which ordinary people like us can connect to things like securities through blockchain and the internet, rather than these old-fashioned, now very outdated institutions and umpteen pairs of middlemen. Those days have gone now. For most of us, but there's a big majority still who don't understand anything I've just said there. So the SEC and the NASDAQ working together to organize themselves will just open up more pools. Trump media, whatever you think, it's nothing to do with Donald Trump actually, but whatever you think of that political family now, it is what it is. They're not going to let the grass grow. So Trump media, as you heard from Trump Jr. last week, have raised $3 billion to acquire digital assets. That's going very much hand in glove with what's going on at Strive and Strategy and Blockchain Group and all these big institutions now that are moving forwards with their digital asset balance sheets. Vivek Ramaswamy, who has a political and business crossover, as you know, his company Strive raised 750 million last week to acquire more Bitcoin. So they're just coming out the woodwork over and over again. These are new names every single week, new names coming out all the time. Yeah, Jack Dorsey, one of the original OGs, his company Square has now announced Bitcoin Lightning payments on all terminals. So we're looking at that. We use a couple of payment terminals at DBM, and finally, because getting Bitcoin payments has been a bit of a headache because it's a relatively slow system in terms of remittance. But now we've got Lightning, everything changes. Everything changes. And obviously we all want to be paid in Bitcoin, yeah, rather than paid in dollars. Then you've got the big institutions that sit above all this, yeah, which are your BlackRocks of this world, have now sanctioned their wealth advisors to be able to go ahead and advise their clients to acquire Bitcoin. That is big. Really big. Yeah. That's just going to put more and more and more legitimacy and put a lot of spotlights on what we've known for over a decade, that you need sound money. You need sound money. And according to Mike Saylor just over the weekend, we're hearing that even the Bank of England now are on the brink of following this, which inevitably they were always going to do. Inevitably. Yeah. You've even got Nigel Farage over in the States last week doing a fireside, 25-minute fireside, talking about how he's going to basically follow the Trump model to make sure he wins the next election in 2029. It's too far out. They need to do things a lot more quickly than that, and they will. They will. So it doesn't really matter to us who's in power. It never has done. But what matters is the sentiment is coming our way. So this next 5 years are going to be quite extraordinary if you determine that you're going to put yourself in front of it. Was it ever thus? All right. Now, last but not least, came out of the woodwork very late last night. BlackRock acquired over $200 million of ETH last week. Now, they must know something. Yeah, that's a huge amount of ETH. So they must know something about ETFs and all sorts of different things going on there. So if you're really on the ball, and we'll touch on this at the end of this session today, if you're looking to re-leverage funds from your balance sheet and you're looking to put ETH on as part of your model, yeah, alongside other assets, then that might not be a bad thing to keep an eye on. Many of you already own a lot of ETH already, of course, because ETH has been part of the fabric just as much as Bitcoin over the years. Page number 2 of the same macroeconomic level, because there's such a lot was said last week. All right, just to reiterate, we're looking at exactly the same headlines there, M2. You know, just be very, very aware we caught that up at the end of March, so now it's just timing. June has got all the signs of being a very, very buoyant month. Multiple all-time highs is our estimation in June. Where are we getting that from? Well, we're not just making it up. We're listening to people like David Sachs, who's the crypto czar, the so-called crypto czar for the US government, and absolutely confident that they'll have the necessary regulations in the US this year, which is a phenomenal piece of work. Yeah, the people are getting it. Doesn't matter what color you are in terms of political allegiance. It's all leading to the same place, and we're just happy to be 10 years ahead of it. Even Eric Adams, who's had a hell of a time in New York. I remember working with coaches and clients in New York State, New York City. They couldn't do anything. Even just a few years ago, they couldn't touch anything. They were forced to move out of the state. And now he's been very clear last week that they're going to bring the first bit bonds into New York. They've already made big strides in New York State itself. So good luck to them. And obviously New York is a major, major, major financial center. JD Vance was at the event last week, talking about hundreds of millions of people will own Bitcoin. Yeah. Once hundreds of millions of people own Bitcoin, what do you think the market cap's going to be then? What do you think the price is going to be then? All the tailwinds are with us. This isn't a pipe dream anymore. This isn't just hoping that people get it. This is happening in real time in 2025. And then you've got clever strategies like the Trojan horse strategy, where you've got the dollar stable coins migrating, which they will. Because don't forget, from memory, I think Tether is something like the 6th largest company owner of US Treasuries. Yeah. What do you think's happening with those US Treasuries as Bitcoin becomes much, much more reliable and stable? So they're going to switch. They obviously already are doing. They're not stupid. But the whole idea of the Tether experiment over the past 8-9 years has been to give everybody like us access to US dollar through blockchain. And we've had a hell of a time with it. That's where the USDT smart contract journey came from. That's where the high yields come from. That's why we're involved with what we're involved with, because we understand the leverage yielding capabilities of USDT, yeah, and how it works on rails, and how it's going to get even more pronounced as we get into AI. But to underpin that, US Treasuries aren't necessarily going to be the most stable place to be, which is a crazy thing to say, compared to Bitcoin or gold. So the Trojan horse strategy is something you should study. It's very, very interesting. Again, Jack Dorsey, when he's back in town, big things are happening. The company Block, 9.7% yield, and it's Bitcoin just by routing payments through Lightning. So you've got to think about that. Okay, well, if Bitcoin underpins Lightning, I need to own more Bitcoin because they're going to be using that to create the yields. And that's another way of enjoying higher and quicker equity from Bitcoin. Okay, so think about these steps and all these connections and how they all come together. And just to repeat what I've said there, Tether announces it already owns over 100,000 Bitcoin, right? And 50 tons of gold. Why? Understand why that is compared to how they started with US Treasuries. Yeah, this is the problem with a lot of pension plans, whichever part of the world you're in, it doesn't matter. A lot of us have pension plans based on the stock markets. You've got to watch this stuff. Watch it very carefully. The baby boomers might be okay, but anybody younger than baby boomers, you've really got to be careful. Russia Central Bank, okay, we bring this up because obviously we've got this standoff. We'll talk about it in the political section. America dropped the ball big time when it came to banning Russia from the payment rails and access to US Treasuries. They massively dropped the ball, and they know they have. That's why they're making these moves now to try and calm it a little bit. But they've got Ukraine stood in the way and the warmongers of Europe. Russia will do what they want to do anyway, and already have. They've not got anywhere near the debt of Europe and America. They've been very clever in re-resourcing out to the BRICS nations. So them now adding their weight to the allowance for their central bank to own Bitcoin and crypto derivatives just puts them even further ahead. So this will have massive implications for sanctions, which has good implications for us in terms of how we structured the business model over the past 5 years. Be aware of that. And Cantor Fitzgerald, last but not least, a gold-protected Bitcoin fund, which is, again, going back to where USDT are coming into this and moving away from treasuries or not being as reliant on treasuries and moving into this area where they can combine the Bitcoin exposure with downside protection against Bitcoin and against gold price. Now, we've spoken about that for years. If you've been listening to what we've been talking about DBM for years, it's all about being owning 1 Bitcoin or 1 kilogram of gold. That's what should be on your balance sheet. Okay, you can work to degrees towards that as you move through your business, if you've got the fortitude and resilience to do it. But the formula's never changed. In fact, the formula's become more pronounced than ever before. M2 money supply up, interest rates down. Very, very likely we're going to be hearing something about that, I'd suggest, in June. You've got sovereign Bitcoin reserves. You've got drastically, click the chart, drastically falling availability of Bitcoin on OTC and public exchanges, massively falling. I reported last week that it's something like 0.33 a day. So it's not difficult to calculate. Within a couple of years, there won't be any Bitcoin available on the public exchanges. That's the ultimate in supply restriction, which is all about price guidance. And then you've got the global demand. I've spoken about it in many, many different points on this call already before we even get to the politics. So it all equals price. Your job is to determine how you want to position your life to be in front of this quicker so that you're not going to miss another channel of exposure to growth. If you missed the internet, if you missed the e-commerce bubbles, and if you missed the Bitcoin, then that's 3 times you've missed in a life. So you better sit down and think very carefully what we're going to do if you've got a determination to get ahead and be successful. Now, the politics just adds more fuel to the fire. It's fascinating. It's difficult and it's frustrating. As I've said many times, if you want to be as close to the money supply as you need to be to break out of being a slave to the fiat system, you remember the pie chart I've shown for many, many years. On the extremities, the unbanked, then you've got the employed, then you've got the small business owners, then you've got the shareholders, then you've got the banks, then you've got the central banks, the governments, then you've got the central banks. If you want to be close to the money supply, which is what Bitcoin now absolutely represents, you're going to have to learn to put up with the rough and tumble of what happens in global politics. And we've experienced that big time when it comes to sanctions. A lot of people don't take the time or can't be bothered to go and study that, and would rather blame and kick out and, cry into the cornflakes. You need to understand, because when you understand, it gives you a confidence boost to say, I see. So this isn't an if, this is a when. Because things can't stay the way they are, and they're not doing. Because other than Europe and the UK today are saber-rattling, getting ready on a war footing, that's because, as we've seen over many centuries, as soon as governments see that they need to deflect and find ways to print currency, they'll pump it in to the military complex. Based in the UK, just today, Keir Starmer all over the mainstream media saying, we're getting on a war footing. He's studying some military manufacturing facility in Glasgow, getting ready to press the money button, because that's their excuse. That's the arms race. The rest of the world, or big chunks of the rest of the world, including Russia, I might add, are already down the hash race. This is the immutable bureaucracy problem Europe's got. And it's as clear as the nose on your face to everybody else other than European politicians. Does it matter to us when it comes to Bitcoin? No. We can just scoot around it. And while they're still scratching their heads and saber rattling, we can be successful as individuals. And we just wait for the next cycle. It doesn't really matter who's in politics, who's in leadership. What matters is the global movements. All right. Now, it does affect us directly at the moment, as I say, because we're so close to the money supply these days, we are affected by sanctions. Well, that'll shake itself out. It can't be much longer, because the US can't afford for Russia to run alone and outplay them when it comes to the capital markets in the BRICS nations. They can't afford for that to happen because they want the dollar to stay the hegemony. All right. So peace deals are inevitable. It's just frustrating getting there. That's all. So UK, Canada, EU, I might add to that Australia, New Zealand, are just trapped in this immutable bureaucracy. But it's all shaking out now because things are happening on a trade level. And most of all, you're getting the Bitcoin Act now coming through the states very, very quickly. The states can't afford not to do this, because if they don't do it, someone else will. And they want to be, and very likely they will be, a front runner, which means they can hold the dollar as the hegemony. Right? So this just means that those of us who already own Bitcoin or are using this time to get prepared by owning more Bitcoin, as I'll show you why that's important in a minute. It just gives us time to see that way ahead of the average person, way ahead of the average company, and even way ahead of the average government. That's called front running, and that's how you get in front of a wealth transfer. We've been talking about this for years. The governors in the states understand this as well, by the way, in the US. So the likes of Texas and other big states, they already recognize this, so they're getting prepared and signing off these bills as necessary, as Texas did just last week. All right. In the meantime, Vivek's back at it again here, Ohio governor, and being very public with his statements about, right, we're going to start getting down to the root of this. The kids are doing it anyway. So let's educate people, not about Bitcoin literacy, but about financial literacy. It just so happens Bitcoin is root one rail. You should be doing this for your kids and grandkids already by making sure that they own Bitcoin, even if it's through yourself. All right, inevitably then you've got other wider party groups. We've got a new president in Poland as of today, very crypto friendly. We've got the Czech Republic moving down this road very quickly. We've got the Prague event coming up on the 19th of June. And you've got Nigel Farage, for those of you based in the UK, inevitably jumping on the bandwagon, right? Now, to be fair to him, he has been talking about this since 2020, yeah? But there's been no environment for that to have any traction. But now Trump's around, he's just slipstreaming Trump. He's just slipstreaming Trump. 2029 for the UK, so it's eons away. But they've got a duty to get this done, which is why the Bank of England is already moving on this. And Farage will just ride this up because other politicians that we've got in the UK don't know their ass from their elbow, and they're certainly not business people. The tariff effects will keep doing what the tariff effects do. Okay, it can be a bit frightening when you're tracking it day to day because you just don't know what's going to happen next. But it inevitably all leads to the same thing, which is a rebalancing of how taxation policies work. And so far, there's been no evidence of inflation that you'd hear from the mass media, especially those with left-leaning bias. All right, so keep accelerating towards the New World Order, which is what this is all about at the end of the day, and do that through neutral asset ownership. And then whatever shakes out is where we'll be, which is why we're here every week doing these updates, because this is the confidence you need. These are the motivations you need to stay the course. It's a lonely place, this environment, never forget that. And if you want more help with the whole picture, again, get locked into the community, work with people who've got what you want and can prove it, are doing this every day, especially in the workspaces. Get there, just nip in. I'll go into the second part of this session now, and I'll show you exactly the type of thing we're doing in the workspaces, which gives you the ability to get on with things every single day, at least every single week, to build your business, not just sat there with your arms folded, waiting for the world to happen. All right, get involved, invest in yourself first, and enjoy the ride. I'll see you on the next video.